Hi everyone, my name is Blake Stewart and I'm the Director of St. Luke's Preschool in Dapto. Today I have with me Catherine Nielsen-Hewitt and she's from University of Wollongong. Catherine, tell me about yourself.
Well, like you said, I'm an Associate Professor at the University of Wollongong and I'm also the Academic Program Director of the Early Years and have been in that role for the last 5 years. And I'm also the Director of Pedagogical Leadership at Early Start. So I live and breathe teacher education and also child development. And I'm a mother of 3 children. I say children, but one is an adult child. She's actually about to turn 21.
Wow.
So I have a daughter and 2 boys. So as I said, I live and breathe children's development.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's what my week really looks like, being a mum and also teaching pre-service teachers and doing a lot of research around workforce development, but really focused, a lot of the work that we do at Early Start is really around engaging in research that's translational in nature, and it's about improving the outcomes for children and families, particularly in our area of Wollongong, but also in regional and rural and remote areas of New South Wales. So.
Sound very busy.
Very busy, but I love everything that I do, which is good. So I always say I love my 3 jobs.
Yes.
So it's enjoyable, and a lot of the work that we do at Early Start really takes me into services. So I get to spend a lot of time working with educators, and that's an incredibly rewarding role because partly educators play such a significant role in the lives of children.
Yeah.
So I get to why I don't always have direct contact with children.
Yes.
I have the privilege of having that indirect impact by working directly with educators.
Yes, definitely. You mentioned you do research around child development. Is there an aspect of child development that you really are interested in or you're currently researching at the moment?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of work around different aspects of child development, but a particular passion of mine and work that I've been doing with colleagues of mine, Stephen Howard and Mark Derone, is really around children's self-regulation and the impact that children's self-regulation has, not only in terms of their engagement in learning, but their success in life.
That's great. So self-regulation, for those who are watching, what is self-regulation?
Yeah, it's complex in the sense that a lot of people talk about it, but we don't always know what it is. And when we're talking about self-regulation, we're really talking about children's ability to control their behaviours, their thoughts, their emotions and their social interactions in order to achieve a goal or to respond to an environmental demand.
Yes.
So in that sense, it's a little bit like children who can regulate their behaviours and their emotions are able to start doing something that they might not want to do and stop doing something that they do want to do.
Yes.
So, for instance, self-regulation is intentional and it's active. So I don't want to hit Blake, so I'm going to walk a little way away from Blake so I'm not tempted to hit him.
Yes.
And it also involves an aspect of what we call the ability to inhibit our responses or delay gratification. So children who can regulate their behaviours and emotions are able to inhibit their responses long enough to think about what the potential consequences of those behaviours might be. So, for instance, Blake, you've got a watch that I would actually really like to have. But if I take that watch, you're probably not going to think too fondly of me.
Yeah.
And you're going to get quite upset and you might not ever invite me back to come and chat with you again.
That's correct.
So I'm going to think about that and I'll think, Blake, I might say, Blake, when you're finished with that watch and you don't want it anymore, can I have a turn? And so that's a sign of self-regulation. It's that ability to really inhibit and to think about the consequences. So that's the behavioural or emotional component of self-regulation that we're very conscious of.
Yes.
So we know when children have trouble with their behaviour regulation because they often might have emotional meltdowns or lots of tantrums. But there's another component of self-regulation which is really important for children's success, and that's the thinking component, or the cognitive component of self-regulation. So that's children's ability to remember, so it involves memory. It also involves our ability to pay attention, so that's the attention component. It's our ability to problem solve, but it also has a motivational component. And these are what we call our executive functions or our higher order thinking. So if we think of our behavioural self-regulation a little bit like a thermostat.
Yeah, yeah.
So the idea is we have an ideal temperature. Let's say we set our temperature on 24 degrees Celsius. So our behavioural regulation regulates our emotions and our behaviours. So when the temperature gets a little bit high, our regulatory skills kick in to bring that temperature back down to 24 degrees. And likewise, with the executive functions, they're more like what I would call our air traffic control system. So the idea is we're taking in all this different information, we've got our own thoughts, we've got to remember things, but we've also got our own goals and motivation. So while our air traffic control system works effectively, all the planes stay in the air. But the minute something doesn't work, that's when things crash.
Yeah.
And come down. So it's very integrated in the way that we work, and you can see why it is such a complex skill. But when we get it right, it really sets us up for success.
That's amazing. I love those analogies. That helps bring it home for those people watching today. Do you have any, so those educators watching right now that are in preschools, in long daycares, in kindergartens, what are some quick strategies that you could suggest for those educators watching that support self-regulation within their classrooms?
Yeah. I think the important thing to think about is the different components of self-regulation.
Yep.
And if you can continue to wear that, what I call a self-regulatory lens, that will help you to think about the behaviours or the types of activities that you engage in to support children's self-regulation.
Yeah.
So it's multifactorial. So some children may have a lot of challenges in terms of their behavioural regulation, but they're very good at paying attention, following instructions, they can problem solve and they can persevere. So then we're thinking about what do we need to do for those children to support their ability to regulate their behaviours and their emotions.
Yes.
So that's the first thing to think about as a parent or as an educator, is what areas of self-regulation is my child struggling in?
Yes.
How can I support them? Other children might actually be very good in terms of controlling their emotions, but have a lot of trouble attending or engaging in problem solving or persisting in the face of challenge. So let's go back to thinking about behaviours, and that's often our call to action.
Yes.
So that's probably one of the challenges. I think it's the classic example as educators. We talk about driving to work on the Tuesday, and the Tuesday's the day that we have to stop twice to get a coffee because, Tuesday's going to be a little bit trickier than Monday. And often that's because of the behavioural climate.
Yeah.
So for children, it's about helping them to achieve a sense of calmness or to inhibit their responses so they don't act out. So calmness is interesting because we often ask children to engage in emotions, but we talk about emotions in the abstract. So what does calm mean to you?
It's different for every child, every person, I think.
Yeah. So it's about thinking about that child, and we talk about high quality pedagogy as pedagogy that differentiates our approach to teaching depending on the needs of the children.
Yes.
And this is really important in terms of self-regulation. So think about a time when you're really stressed. It might have been a car accident. It might have been...
Oh, gosh.
For me, it might be an assignment that you've got due tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you know that you've still got to do a whole lot of programming in the service. You've actually got to speak to a couple of parents. You haven't started the assignment. So I want you to think about that feeling.
Yep.
And how you feel.
Yep.
All right? Okay, now I want you to close your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to think for a moment about an ice cream.
Yep,
and it's an ice cream cone, and it's a lovely big chunk of chocolate ice cream on top of that cone. And now you are the ice cream cone, and you're sitting outside in the sun, and the sun's making that ice cream melt. And it's coming over the top of the cone, and it's developing a big patch on the ground. So now you're just this big bit of ice cream that's almost like chocolate milk on the ground. How are you feeling?
Feeling like I wasn't supposed to be feeling before that.
So you can open your eyes if you'd like, or you can keep talking with your eyes.
It was actually quite nice.
Yeah. So it's the same kind of thing. So that's about helping you to achieve a sense of calm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we do that different ways with children. It might be, I want you to close your eyes and now imagine that you're blowing up a balloon.
Mm.
And so it's that breathing again, it's that calmness. Or another imagery that we use with children is, the pinwheel.
Yes.
Imagine that you've got a pinwheel in front of you and you're blowing it. It's moving around. So even as I was describing that to you, it was actually making me feel more relaxed as well.
My heart rate was dropping.
So that's something that we can do with children. It's really giving them that time and having a sense of what their sense of calm is and what strategies they need to do. Sometimes it might be saying to myself, using self-talk, I'll get a turn soon. I'll get a turn soon. I'll be able to have a turn soon.
Yes.
If children have trouble waiting their turn. So there's those kind of strategies. Other things around behavioural self-regulation might be things like being able to inhibit a natural response. So wonderful group-based activities for this are things like musical statues.
Yep.
Where children have to stop when the music stops or start when it goes. Or if you want to make it even more challenging, you do the opposite. So you actually have to dance when the music stopped.
Yeah.
And still. And that takes conscious control.
It does.
And conscious attention. So there's some really great activities. It's thinking about how you can support children to control their emotions and control their behaviours. So it's really about giving those permission. Another thing that adults, and this is particularly important for parents as well as educators, is really being aware that teaching good self-regulation requires good adult self-regulation. So it's thinking about your own behaviours. How do you respond under stress? Or when you're faced with something really challenging, do you give up and walk away or do you persist and keep at it? So we need to be aware of our own behaviours as well and how do we react under stress and stressful situations.
That's a great reflection for parents at home at the moment, particularly with coronavirus and homeschooling as well. Like that's children and parents are working, doing homeschooling, all in that one space.
That's right.
There's stresses that they've never felt before. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I think one thing we know is that children's capacity or ability to self-regulate is significantly diminished at times of stress.
Yes.
Right? So, and stress can be different things. There can be good stress. So it's not unusual for children to have emotional meltdowns at birthday parties or Christmas because they're overexcited. So stress can be positive as well as negative.
Yes.
But stressful situations like a lack of control over our environment, as we're seeing very much at the moment in what's happening with COVID. Like many children are experiencing a sense of loss and grief. Like they've lost their normal routines. They can't get to go to ballet. They can't go to soccer training. They might not be able to interact with their friends. They are experiencing a sense of loss in terms of sometimes the quality of the relationships that they have with their parents, because their parents may not have the same emotional availability now as they do normally, and we're in this kind of where we're trying to juggle things and there's a lot of pressure. So stress like that, or when children are overtired or hungry, it's common to see children really struggling with self-regulation. So children are going through a lot at the moment, and especially for those in our area, they've come off the back of, we've had floods, we've had fires, and now we've got COVID-19. So for many children, they have this very real fear that the world is not a safe place to be in.
Yeah.
And young children are particularly vulnerable because they don't have a lot of coping mechanisms and they're dependent on adults at this point to kind of support that. So I think it's important for adults to understand that at times like this, children will often regress in their self-regulation. So a child who was very good at problem solving or could attend may not be able to do that as effectively as they could previously. So it's really, and for some children they've moved from a state of what we call self-regulation to one of regressing back to co-regulation, where they really need that scaffolded support from their parents. So it's about shifting our expectations and providing more support. And often another analogy to add to our thermostat and air traffic control is sometimes it's useful when we think about the external impacts on self-regulation is to think of self-regulation as a muscle. So when we use, like you go to the gym.
Yes, I do.
So let's say that you've been at the gym for half an hour and you've been doing weights. But then the next set of weights that you do, you might not be as effective as lifting
Yes.
that because your muscles are sore.
Yep.
So if you think about stressful situations, that children may have been required to control their behaviours and their emotions and their attention for so long that they get to a point where that muscle just gets sore
Yep.
and it's not as effective. And so they need a little bit of an extra support in lifting the demands of the environment. And the flip side is that just like we talk about, we build muscles through repetition and practice, we build self-regulation through repetition and practice. So it's going back and thinking about those supporting their emotions and behaviours, but we're thinking about the executive function part of self-regulation, and this is linked really closely to academic adjustment
Yep.
and school readiness, is about giving children lots of opportunities to engage in problem solving. Self-regulation is about setting goals, so it's around engaging children in making choices. So looking in the educational setting, that might be setting up the rules of the classroom.
Yep.
At home, it might be limited giving choices. And at times of stress, that might be limited choices. So deciding, out of these two outfits, which outfit would you like to wear today? Or of the books that we're going to read tonight before you go to sleep, pick 3 books for me that you would like to read.
That's
so
great.
It's about giving children choices, and that's important because when things don't go according to plan, children need to know that they have options.
Yes.
So the child who doesn't understand having options or isn't able to problem solve, they're much more likely to really kind of have that emotional meltdown or to walk away or to avoid a situation.
Withdraw. So, Catherine, you gave some examples about how to support children with self-regulation in the early childhood setting and at home. Do you have any other examples that you can provide for our families?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that families can do, and some of them are just around incidental things, like when they sit down to have dinner. One of the great things is there's an activity that we call holding fast, and which the idea is that everyone needs to wait till everyone's sitting at the table and sitting down, and no one starts until everyone's ready to start. And that's really important for that kind of delayed gratification.
Yes.
Also, pretend play is probably one of the most important activities that children can engage in terms of supporting their self-regulation. And when that's kind of extended by the adult, that's even more important. And the reason that pretend play is so important, that it actually gives children opportunities to plan.
Yep.
So, Blake, you said that you wanted to build a fort. What do you think you might need for that fort? So it's
Get
really
them to think about.
getting children to think about what they're going to need. So we make plans, we make choices within the context of pretend play, and also it gives children opportunities to lead.
Yes.
And all of those are critical in terms of those executive function and the thinking component of self-regulation. Also games with rules, so board games, concentration games. We have there's an assessment that we have developed, Stephen Howard and myself, called Persist. And it has a number of different activities within that. And one of the activities that children have to do is, it's like a memory game, so a concentration game where you put all the cards face down and you've got to find pairs. If you think about what's required to play that successfully, is that you actually need to pay attention. You need to wait your turn. So even though you know you've already spotted where the pair is and you just want to turn it over, you actually have to inhibit that behaviour and control yourself long enough until it gets to your turn. So there's a lot of demands about that. You've got to focus when someone else has a turn, but there's also an emotional behavioural component. So how do you feel when someone else gets the pair that you were going to get, but they got it before you?
Yeah, and you're watching them do it. You're going to be upset. You're going to be angry. That was mine.
So you learn how to cope with disappointment. And
Yes.
so for parents, I think it's tempting, and I think I've done it myself, is that it's very tempting to let your young child win at a board game, but it's actually really important for children to learn how to lose.
Yes.
Another part for parents is around allowing children to take what we call measured risk. So, and that might be things like giving children something as simple as a puzzle that might be pretty tricky for them to achieve, and it's teaching them to persist in that. So they might want to give up, but you scaffold that. And so let's say they're having trouble, you might say, all right, let's find the corner pieces first. What does a corner piece look like? So really simple things like that. So games with rules, pretend play, looking at activities that require children that they might not get it right and they continue to persist in the face of challenge. Because persisting in a tricky task rather than giving up and walking away is one of the most important outcomes of self-regulation, particularly in the context of academic achievement.
Yeah, definitely. For all those people watching at home, they're taking on all these activities, they're excited to start implementing this. What are the long-term impacts for self-regulation as children move beyond the early childhood development into primary and high school?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think the one thing that we need to recognise is children are not born with the ability to self-regulate. We're not born with the ability to attend and to remember to problem solve. We're born with the potential to do that. And whether or not we acquire these skills depends largely on the quality of the environments to which we're exposed and the quality of the relationships that occur within those environments. So I think first and foremost, self-regulation depends on children having secure relationships with the adults. And that's important because that creates a sense of safety. So I talked about that, children's ability to engage in what we call measured risk. Children are much more likely to take a chance on something that's tricky when they feel safe and secure in the environment. And you see that in high quality early childhood practice.
Yes.
You'll see children who feel secure in a learning environment and how they engage within that learning environment, and that's really beneficial. But in terms of, if you think about the impact, children who start school, who can pay attention, they can follow instructions, they can communicate their needs and wants, they can park their own needs in preference for others.
Yeah.
They're the children who are ready for school, but they're also the children who are ready for life.
Yeah.
So we know that children who don't have these skills, it places them at risk in terms of their academic achievement, the quality of their peer relationships and their social emotional adjustment. And there's a study that was conducted it's called the Multidisciplinary Health and Development Study, and it was a study that began back in 1972 in Dunedin, New Zealand.
Wow.
And it's the longest running longitudinal study in the world. And they actually followed a whole birth cohort, so just around 1,000 that were born in Dunedin at that time. It's quite a small town. And they took measures of these children at 1 and 3 and 5 and right through, and they're continuing. And one of the measures that they took, along with IQ and behaviour, was a measure of self-control, which is not self-regulation, but it's very similar to self-regulation. Yep. And they found measures of self-control at 3 and 5 were predictive of variations in health, wealth and criminality at age 32.
Wow.
So children who had poor self-control at 3 and 5 were much more likely to have engaged in delinquent behaviours and criminality. 81% of those children with self-control had been convicted of a criminal offence at 32. They also had more financial difficulties, so they were more likely to be unemployed or have other financial stresses. And they were overrepresented in the health system, so they're more likely to have mental health issues or drug dependencies. That measure of self-control was over and above IQ and socioeconomic status.
Wow.
So highly predictive and highly powerful.
Yeah.
Now, the thing to know about self-regulation, it is changeable. We can change this, but we have what we call windows of opportunity.
Yes.
So really, it's not until children are about 3 that they have the developmental skills necessary to develop the skills needed to self-regulate. So it's kind of the 3 to 5 is our sensitive period, so particularly around social and emotional and behavioural self-regulation. The cognitive component, the thinking component, can continue right through to the end of the primary school years. And that's partly because that's controlled by our frontal cortex.
Yeah.
And that's the last part of our brain to develop. So there's this growth principle called cephalocaudal proxima distal. So the idea behind that, cephalocaudal is top down. So if you think about your baby when it's born, they develop control over their head before their back, before their legs.
Yeah.
Likewise, proxidistal, it's in, out. So control of your arms before your hands and your fingers. That's how the brain works. So it goes in, out.
Yep.
And that is why self-regulation, which sits in the front of our brain, that's our control system, is so affected by our environment. And the good thing is that we can really shape children's development, but we have to get in early. It's not to say that it's cast in stone,
Yes.
but the older children get, the harder it is to change
definitely.
those patterns of interaction.
Catherine, thank you so much for your time with us today. You've given us a wealth of knowledge, ideas, take-homes for our families and our educators watching today. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Oh, absolutely. It was really fun chatting with you.
Thank you, Catherine.